Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons and love are told. Don't forget to like, share this with your friends, and subscribe for more touching stories. I never thought that a single click could unravel months, no, years of effort in an instant. My name is Ethan Harris, and I've always found comfort in digital worlds. I'm 28, a network administrator by day, a committed gamer by night, sinking 10 to 12 hours a week into sprawling single-player RPGs. These games weren't just hobbies. They were milestones, journeys that I lived, breathed, and meticulously preserved. I invested in every decision, every quest, and every digital triumph. So when Natalie, now 26, decided it was her mission to teach me how to grow up, I didn't anticipate that she'd do it by deleting my entire gaming life. Over 400 hours of gameplay vanished in a heartbeat. Gone. Poof. I stared at my empty save folder, disbelief clawing at me. Ethan, you need to face reality, Natalie said, a smirk tugging at her lips. All this gaming, what are you really accomplishing? Look at me. I run a serious business, unlike you, lost in your childish fantasies. Her tone was sharp, almost celebratory. I felt like the floor beneath me had cracked open. This was her idea of humor? Deleting every quest, every carefully strategized decision, all my characters gone? I had no warning, no compromise. Just one message, almost mocking. Grow up, Ethan. The first wave of anger was pure disbelief. I tried to talk sense into her, my voice shaking. Natalie, this isn't just a game. These are hours of work. Memories, achievements, you can't just delete them. She rolled her eyes, walking away as if my words were wind against a wall. Our apartment, once a space of shared laughter, became a battlefield. I couldn't stop replaying that single smirk in my head. Every pixel she deleted was a betrayal, every lost file a reminder that trust, at least in her eyes, was optional. Friends and colleagues tried to mediate, offering perspectives I didn't want to hear. It's just a game, Ethan. Snap out of it, one friend said casually over lunch. But they didn't understand that in digital life, as in real life, value isn't always tangible. I had invested time, intellect, and emotion. Those lost files represented dedication, countless late nights, and personal triumphs. Natalie's casual dismissal felt like a deliberate erasure of my identity. And it wasn't just the games. Her action triggered something deeper, something visceral. The understanding that someone I loved and trusted could weaponize my passion against me. Arguments became the soundtrack of our lives. Our conversations spiraled into fights about maturity, respect, and personal boundaries. I argued that destroying digital property, my property, was unacceptable, no matter her intentions. She countered with a lecture on growing up, financial responsibility, and the supposed frivolity of my hobby. Every discussion seemed to escalate. Our apartment echoed with tension, each word a dagger. The irony wasn't lost on me. She claimed to be teaching me maturity, yet her actions were impulsive, destructive, and childish. Her reasoning was consistent in its absurdity. You hide behind games, Ethan. I'm trying to wake you up, but... Her wake-up call felt like a sledgehammer, pulverizing years of dedication in a single act of thoughtless vengeance. I realized then that respect in a relationship isn't assumed. It has to be earned and reciprocated. Natalie had made a choice to belittle my passion and strip me of the work I valued most. In that moment, the line between emotional abuse and thoughtless pranks blurred, and I understood how easily someone could exploit love as justification for cruelty. Late at night, I became sleepless. I scoured forums, talking to gamers who had faced similar digital annihilation, searching for solace or a solution. Recovery wasn't just about the lost hours, it was about reclaiming agency over my life. I felt powerless in a home where personal boundaries were ignored. Every attempt to rebuild or discuss our issues met with her dismissiveness. I began documenting everything. Screenshots of messages, timestamps of deleted files, conversations where she justified her behavior. It felt strange to catalog cruelty, but I needed evidence, not for revenge yet, but to reclaim the narrative she had tried to erase. I can still see her expression as she held my external drive, laughing. You take this too seriously. It's just files, she said. That line echoed for days, a mantra that fueled both my anger and my clarity. I began to realize the real issue wasn't gaming or business, it was control. Natalie wanted dominance, a sense of power that she could flex by targeting what mattered most to me. It wasn't personal growth she sought, it was submission. And submission was not something I was willing to offer, even if it meant confrontation, estrangement, or fallout. In the weeks that followed, our apartment became a silent war zone. I spent hours reinstalling programs, attempting recovery, but the reality was brutal. Most of it was gone. Our arguments evolved from the lost files to the implications of our actions. Friends were drawn in. Families gave unsolicited advice. Some sided with Natalie, claiming gaming was childish. Others understood the emotional devastation of losing one's digital life. Each perspective reminded me how unique digital ownership is. It carries value, status, and identity, yet society often dismisses it as trivial. I now knew firsthand how easily that dismissal could weaponize someone's ignorance. The tipping point came during one heated evening. Natalie accused me of being selfish, of valuing games over our relationship. I snapped, telling her exactly how destructive and controlling her actions were. My voice trembled with a mix of anger and hurt. You don't respect what matters to me. You don't see the effort, the discipline, the patience. You just destroy it because it doesn't fit your narrative. She countered with tears, claiming she was the victim, painting me as the immature one. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in our dimly lit living room. The contrast between her perception and my reality was staggering. Eventually, the emotional toll forced me to step back. I realized that no amount of pleading or explanation would make Natalie see reason. Her actions were deliberate, and I needed to protect myself, not just my property. I implemented stricter digital security measures, separating personal files from shared devices, and finally accepted that this relationship was a battlefield with no neutral ground. The initial shock of betrayal evolved into a cold, focused clarity. The games, my hours of labor, the worlds I built, they represented more than entertainment. They symbolized resilience, dedication, and the consequences of underestimating the emotional power of digital life. Looking back, I understand now that this incident was the catalyst for everything that followed. It was the line in the sand, the moment I stopped seeing Natalie as a partner and started seeing the true impact of reckless, disrespectful behavior. Every sleepless night, every argument, every mocking smirk was a lesson in boundaries, in the value of personal effort, and in the fragile nature of trust. The deletion of my game files wasn't just about pixels disappearing. It was about understanding that in relationships, respect for what matters to another human being is non-negotiable, and so, with a mixture of grief and clarity, I began planning my next steps, knowing that retaliation wasn't just about vengeance, it was about balance, justice, and reclaiming control over a life that had been disrupted by thoughtless destruction. The memory of that smirk, so casual and mocking, would stay with me, a symbol of the recklessness I was determined never to allow to dominate me again. The sting of betrayal from Natalie's deletion of my game files settled into a cold determination. My name is Ethan Harris, and after the initial shock, I knew I couldn't let her actions go unchecked. I spent days meticulously planning my response, not out of blind rage, but out of a need to establish boundaries, to assert that no one, not even someone I loved, could obliterate years of work, dedication, and personal passion with a smirk. It was more than games. It was about respect and consequences. Natalie ran a small but steady digital business selling planners and templates on Etsy. To her, it was the symbol of her independence and adult responsibility. To me, after seeing the lack of original content in her portfolio, I recognized vulnerability and overconfidence waiting to be exploited, not to destroy her entirely, but to deliver a message about respect and foresight. I started with the laptop she left carelessly, unattended. Accessing it required nothing more than observing patterns and exploiting the same naive trust she had exploited in me. One by one, I located her carefully labeled folders, the ones that contained her most critical work months of templates, meticulously designed digital planners, and a handful of branding files. Each file was a testament to her work ethic, but it was also her Achilles heel. She had no comprehensive backup system in place, relying instead on a single external drive and cloud storage she rarely checked. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had deleted my digital universe to teach me a lesson and yet exposed hers through neglect. I saved copies initially, thinking I might only scare her, but the files themselves became the fulcrum of control. When Natalie came home that evening, expecting our usual tension-filled argument, I was calm. I let her rant, let her accuse, let her replay the memory of my despair. "You don't even care about me, Ethan," she said, pacing like a caged animal. "You're immature, reckless, and all you care about are your stupid games." I leaned back, sipping coffee, letting her words wash over me without reaction. Inside, my mind was calculating, aligning the plan that would restore the balance she had so flagrantly disrupted. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about consequences. I wanted her to understand that digital property has value, that neglect and destruction have tangible effects, and that she had underestimated the person she had provoked. I began the deletion process carefully, methodically, ensuring that nothing could be recovered easily. Every template, every planner, every design layer was erased from her laptop and her external storage. I watched as the files disappeared, one by one, and I imagined the shock she would feel. It wasn't satisfaction or glee, though I won't lie. There was a quiet vindication. It was the calm recognition that justice doesn't always need to be loud to be effective. When the process was complete, the folders that had once held her business empire were empty shells. I left a single note in the folder labeled "Learn from this." It was brief, precise, and entirely unambiguous. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. She screamed, cried, and attempted to blame me for emotional abuse. Friends and family were pulled in, as they often are when personal conflicts reach boiling points. They listened to her recount the disaster of her business collapsing, her fury, as she realized the months of work and revenue vanished. She had orders pending, some requiring immediate refunds, and in her panic, she calculated that over $800 would need to be returned to disgruntled customers. Negative reviews poured in. She called the situation a nightmare, a catastrophe, and I watched quietly from my apartment's corner, knowing she had finally grasped the weight of what it meant to lose control over one's digital assets. As she scrambled to reach out to clients attempting to salvage her reputation, I documented her mistakes. I discovered through emails and order records that many of her templates had originally been purchased from design bundles, then resold under her branding. It was not illegal, but it revealed a vulnerability and a lack of originality in her business model. Every frantic phone call, every panicked refund request, every tearful admission that she had underestimated digital responsibility confirmed the lesson I had hoped she would understand. She had destroyed my digital life, and now she was facing the consequences of ignoring proper precautions and security. Her accusations against me escalated to threats of legal action. "You've ruined my business. This is harassment and destruction of property," she shouted during a heated phone call. I calmly reminded her that she had initiated the first act, that her deletion of my gaming files was deliberate and unprovoked. It was a tense escalation, but the more she raged, the more evident it became that she was unprepared for the fallout she had triggered. Mutual friends tried to mediate, but I had learned long ago that some battles must be faced directly, without interference. Some lessons need to be felt, not explained. Over the next few days, she oscillated between anger, despair, and attempts to manipulate me into feeling guilty. I stood firm, maintaining a composed demeanor that contrasted sharply with her escalating hysteria. I documented everything: messages, screenshots, and timestamps, ensuring that if this conflict escalated into court or social media exposure, I had a clear record of events. The calculated calm I maintained was a reflection of the contrast between her impulsive actions and the deliberate, measured response I had orchestrated. She wanted chaos. I delivered clarity. The impact on her Etsy shop was devastating. Reviews turned sour, refunds mounted, and the perception of professionalism she had built was undermined by the loss of her files. Orders that had been in preparation were left incomplete, and her clients' trust evaporated. She reached out to friends and family, seeking sympathy and support, portraying me as the villain. But every conversation, every frantic call, revealed the weakness in her preparation, the lack of foresight, and the consequences of underestimating the stakes in the digital world. It was not a victory born of cruelty. It was a revelation of the reality she had ignored. As the tension escalated, we engaged in endless arguments, revisiting old conflicts and piling new grievances onto each other. She accused me of being manipulative, of orchestrating a calculated attack on her livelihood. I didn't deny it. I explained that when digital property is destroyed, it has real-world consequences, and that responsibility and respect are not optional in a shared life. Friends and family continued to weigh in, often exacerbating the situation, but I stayed focused on the principle. Natalie had crossed a line, and boundaries needed enforcement. Eventually, Natalie's panic turned to despair. She admitted to herself the gaps in her backup strategy, the over-reliance on singular storage, and the lack of preparation for unforeseen circumstances. I observed quietly, knowing the lesson was painful but necessary. This was more than about files. It was about responsibility, about accountability, about understanding that actions have consequences, sometimes irreversible. She had taught me what disregard felt like. Now she was learning it firsthand. Our friends and family witnessed the fallout and offered their unsolicited opinions, some condemning my actions, others recognizing the principle at play. Every conversation, every confrontation underscored the complexity of modern relationships in a digital age. Unlike tangible property, digital assets carry both emotional and financial weight, and their destruction can fracture trust in ways that are difficult to repair. Natalie had learned this the hard way, and I had learned that measured, principled action often carries more weight than blind retaliation. As weeks passed, the shock of her losses began to settle. She faced the reality that rebuilding her business required more than apology. It demanded structural changes, proper backups, and a recognition of how her actions had endangered her livelihood. I remained calm, focusing on restoring my own sense of stability and control. The anger that had initially flared was replaced by a quiet acknowledgement. We had both engaged in destructive behavior, but she had underestimated the long-term consequences, and I had ensured they were unmistakably clear. By the time the dust began to settle, Natalie was forced to confront the consequences of her recklessness. She had lost files, revenue, and credibility, and I had regained a sense of agency and justice. The experience underscored a hard truth. Digital negligence has real costs, and the boundaries of respect extend to virtual spaces as surely as physical ones. Our conflict had become a cautionary tale, a vivid demonstration of how destructive behavior can spiral when boundaries are ignored, and how decisive, calculated action can restore balance without descending into uncontrolled chaos. By the time Natalie realized that her losses weren't going to magically fix themselves, she decided to escalate matters legally. She filed a small claims lawsuit against me, claiming emotional distress, destruction of business property, and even attempted to frame my retaliation as harassment. I remember the day the notice arrived. My apartment felt unnervingly quiet, like the calm before a storm, yet I remained steady. I knew the reality of the situation. Her deletion of my 400 hours of gameplay was deliberate, and I had evidence. I had messages, timestamps, screenshots, and documented conversations that clearly demonstrated how this all began. The lawsuit felt more like a procedural formality than a genuine threat, but I understood that the courtroom would become the final stage for our conflict. The day of the hearing arrived, and the small claims court was suffused with an odd combination of tension and absurdity. Natalie presented her case with emotion, her voice trembling as she recounted the loss of her Etsy business files, the refunds she had been forced to issue, and the impact on her professional credibility. Her narrative was compelling on the surface, but as the judge and I presented my documentation, the flaws became evident. Every detail pointed to the mutual destruction of property. She had initiated the conflict by deleting my game files. She had ignored basic digital backup principles, and the so-called emotional distress was intertwined with her own negligence. The judge listened carefully, occasionally raising an eyebrow at the level of immaturity displayed by both parties. When I spoke, I kept my tone calm and precise, explaining the sequence of events, the hours of gameplay lost, and the deliberate nature of her actions. I emphasized the importance of respecting digital property and personal boundaries, illustrating how her initial act had escalated into a chain reaction. "It's not just about games," I said steadily, looking her in the eye. "It's about respect, trust, and understanding that actions have consequences, whether they involve physical or digital property." Her failure to back up her business files created a vulnerability that she ignored until it was too late. My statement wasn't accusatory in a personal sense, but it laid bare the stark reality of her recklessness. The judge weighed both sides with careful attention, acknowledging the emotional weight of the dispute while also emphasizing the financial and professional consequences. Ultimately, the case was dismissed. The ruling was clear: both parties engaged in the destruction of each other's digital property, and neither could claim damages. The judge admonished both of us for letting immature reactions spiral into actions that could have been prevented, but he singled out Natalie for her initial illegal actions and lack of foresight. There was a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement that her choice to delete my files was the catalyst for the entire series of events. The ruling was vindication, a judicial acknowledgement that my response was proportionate within the chaotic digital landscape we had created. After the courtroom drama, Natalie's personal and professional life began to unravel further. She struggled to regain client trust, rebuild her shop, and manage the fallout from over $800 in refunded orders and a cascade of negative reviews. I noticed quietly that she began facing the practical consequences of her negligence the same way I had faced the emotional consequences of her initial act. Friends and family who had watched the spectacle unfold became reluctant to get involved, understanding that the situation was a direct result of a lack of responsibility and respect on both sides. But with Natalie's impulsivity as the spark, it was a sobering observation of how quickly chaos can escalate when boundaries are ignored. I, on the other hand, returned to my gaming life with a renewed sense of peace. The files she had destroyed were irreplaceable, but the calm I had gained through measured retaliation and legal closure restored a sense of control. I rebuilt my gaming environment, double-checked backups, and even took the time to enjoy the subtle satisfaction of uninterrupted immersion in worlds that were once threatened. Beyond the practical aspects, the incident had taught me an invaluable lesson about personal boundaries, respect, and the emotional weight of digital property. I realized that recovery isn't just technical, it's psychological, and reclaiming agency can feel like a profound victory. Beyond the courtroom, the fallout of our relationship became public knowledge in subtle ways. I shared verified details with her new boyfriend carefully, factually, and without exaggeration, highlighting the patterns of behavior that had defined our relationship. It wasn't spite for the sake of spite. It was a continuation of accountability. She had attempted to weaponize personal relationships, manipulate narratives, and dismiss consequences, and I wanted the truth to be known. The impact was immediate. Her new partner had a clear perspective on the patterns she had demonstrated, and she faced the social consequences of her actions without further escalation on my part. Interestingly, the experience also reshaped my understanding of digital life and relationships. I realized that hobbies, work, and digital content carry real-world emotional and financial weight. Losing my game files initially felt devastating, but it catalyzed clarity and preparedness. Witnessing Natalie's loss of her Etsy business reinforced the necessity of respecting both physical and digital property. In the digital age, boundaries are not just recommended, they are essential. Negligence or willful destruction has repercussions that ripple outward in ways that aren't always immediately visible but inevitably impactful. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a quiet sense of closure settling over me. The rage had dissipated, leaving a sense of strategic satisfaction. I resumed gaming, carefully documenting progress, backing up files religiously, and even exploring new creative projects that combined my professional skills with my digital interests. The narrative of my life had shifted from being a victim of destruction to being an agent of measured consequences. I no longer felt defined by Natalie's actions but instead empowered by the lessons learned from them. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I also recognized the broader life lessons embedded in the chaos. Toxic relationships thrive on control, disrespect, and disregard for the value of another person's passions. When boundaries are violated, clarity comes only through deliberate, thoughtful action. Retaliation doesn't need to be mindless or cruel. It can be calculated, measured, and designed to communicate essential truths. The court's ruling, her public reckoning, and my personal recovery all underscored the profound importance of foresight, accountability, and respect in both digital and emotional spheres. Even as Natalie attempted to reconstruct her life and business, the consequences of her choices lingered. Clients remained wary, reviews continued to haunt her digital storefront, and friends quietly reassessed their perceptions. I observed the slow, sometimes painful process of rebuilding, recognizing that true responsibility involves anticipating potential consequences and preparing for them, lessons she had ignored until they became unavoidable. My own life, in contrast, thrived under the lessons I had internalized: diligence, preparation, and the unshakable understanding that respect for others' efforts is non-negotiable. The final act of closure came quietly. I returned to my games, my routines, and my professional responsibilities with renewed vigor. Digital worlds once threatened by thoughtless destruction became arenas of controlled mastery. The chaos that Natalie introduced had been neutralized through clarity, preparation, and measured response. I had learned that in the digital age, retaliation can be both moral and strategic when executed with purpose, and that personal growth often emerges from the ashes of betrayal and conflict. The relationship had ended, but the lessons endured, guiding every decision and every step forward. As I narrate this story today, I want viewers to understand the subtle complexities of modern conflicts. Digital property matters. Emotional and psychological impact can be as real as financial loss. Boundaries exist for a reason, and when someone violates them, consequences are inevitable. My journey through betrayal, retaliation, legal navigation, and personal reclamation demonstrates that even in a world dominated by screens and files, accountability and integrity remain vital. I've learned to safeguard not just my data, but my emotional energy, ensuring that no one can disrupt my life without facing the truth of their actions. This experience changed how I approach relationships, digital ownership, and personal responsibility. I am not defined by what was lost, nor by the chaos someone else created. Instead, I am defined by my choices and response, choices rooted in strategy, clarity, and the understanding that respect is earned, maintained, and never optional. The smirk that once triggered my despair has been transformed into a quiet symbol of lessons learned, boundaries enforced, and the empowerment that comes from reclaiming agency over one's life. So, if you've stayed with me this far, remember, your passions, digital or otherwise, deserve respect. Protect your work, your time, and your boundaries. When someone crosses the line, measured action and accountability, not blind rage, are the most effective tools you have. Let this story serve as both caution and inspiration. Respect others' work, safeguard your own, and never underestimate the value of boundaries, preparation, and strategic clarity. Like this video if you found it engaging, share it with your friends who need to hear this lesson, comment your perspective on digital boundaries, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that intertwine revenge, justice, and life lessons. Life can be chaotic, but clarity, preparation, and respect will always guide you through the storm. Moral lesson: digital possessions, whether games or professional files, carry real value, and neglect or destruction of them can have profound consequences. Respecting someone else's work is not optional, it is foundational to any relationship, personal or professional. Boundaries must be acknowledged and enforced, and foresight in managing digital assets is essential to avoid catastrophic loss. Retaliation, when guided by principle and clarity rather than emotion, can restore balance and teach necessary lessons without descending into chaos. Emotional intelligence, preparation, and accountability are powerful tools in navigating conflicts, showing that growth often comes from experiencing the consequences of actions, both your own and others. Protect your passions, safeguard your efforts, and approach disputes with calm deliberation, knowing that respect, responsibility, and strategic action are far more effective than impulsive destruction. By embracing these lessons, anyone can transform conflict into clarity, ensuring personal growth, preservation of integrity, and the ability to move forward with confidence and peace of mind. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to keep learning through these real-life, digital age stories.